students and net aspirants, welcome back to yet another video session of our channel High Point. I hope all of you are doing great in your life and you are doing everything possibly to achieve your UGC net JRF, and you are striving for it and you are cherishing more and more as the exam is coming up and near. So far we have finished the previous questions from the section drama. So in this video we will be starting with the poetry section. So this is the part one of previous questions from poetry. So from poetry, I think a lot of questions are asking from poetry, because every other, more or less every other age of English literature or any other category of topic that we need to study for English language and literature, net English language and literature, poetry is an essential element. So when I analyzed poetry, abundance of questions are asking from poetry, and that shows that you have to study poetry more and more. So inside poems and poetry collection, plenty of questions are like that. So I have selected 100 relevant previous questions. So if we have time more, we will do more previous questions will be discussed from the part from the session poetry. Now let's begin. Without wasting time, let's begin. So let me quickly remind you that in my website www.highpoint, you will get previous question papers from 2004 onwards, and also many number of practice question papers too. So you can go and check my website, and you can buy the course, and you can systematically move towards UGC net. So before beginning, let me ask you a pardon, because lots of noises are there, because construction works are going on in my neighborhood, so we can't do anything, and continuous rain is happening, so I don't have any other time for recording all these videos and editing it. So bear with me, and you focus on my voice only, so then you will have a your distraction will be reduced. Okay. So the first question here I have is: the poet was of the ardent generation and was only briefly a member of the Communist Party. In his poem, The Pylons, he averred that the pylons are bare like nude giants that have no secrets. This promoted the liberal pylon poets who were happy to use the gas works or pistons of a steam engine as a poetic imagery. So name this poet. So this particular poet, he made a comment about the pylons, and he belongs to the Ardent generation group of poets. Okay, Ardent generation group of poets, we can find them in the postmodern era, or the after 1950. So he made a comment, and he was briefly a member of Communist Party, and in his poem he wrote a poem known as Pylons, the Pylons. And he, in that poem, he actually referred to pylons as bare like nude giants that have no secrets. So you have to find out which poet who made this poet. You have to name that poet who made this comment. So Cecil Day Lewis, Christopher Isherwood, Stephen Spender, Louis Macknies. So the answer is Christopher Spender. So do remember that he belongs to Autumn generation, and he wrote the poem The Pylons. Okay, I'll be going little bit fast, because otherwise this is going to be a very long video, and I don't think that is desirable for you too. So I'll come whatever extra details that is there in my mind at that time when I read the question and the options and the answer. Okay. Now, identify the fireside poets of the US. Okay, you have to identify the fireside poet. Fireside poet is a group of, or kind of a club of poets, that we can see especially in America. Okay, there are group of poets are given: William Cullen Bryant, W.H. Longfellow, Oliver Wendell Holmes. Second option is T.S. Eliot, Wallace Stevens, William Carlos Williams, Marianne Moore, Elizabeth Bishop, and Seaton forms the third option. Emily Lowell, Emily Dickinson, Phyllis Wheatley. So fireside poetry, in my website I have given a separate session for movements and clubs and groups of literary groups and all, because often questions are asking from specifically from such category, from movements, from clubs and groups of literary persons and genres. So you can go and check and know what are things you can learn or you have to learn. Okay, so the answer is option A, William Cullen Bryant, and W.H. Longfellow and Oliver Wendell Holmes. So please learn this fireside poets. These three poets, they are fireside poets, and fireside poets, they that group belong to US or America. The next question is the titular figure of Federico Garcia Lorca's elegy, Lament for Ignacio Sanchez Mejias was. So, titular figure of Federico Garcia Lorca's elegy, Lament for Ignacio Sanchez Mejias was. So, the main figure or the title figure of Lorca's character, Lorca's this particular poem or this particular work, who was he? Who was that character? He was a revolutionary who was associated with the Che Guevara. He was a popular priest and poet. He was a spy who helped the revolutionaries during the Spanish Civil War, or a popular matador and writer. So, who was he? Who was this titular or title character of Lorca? So, he was a popular matador and writer. So, this type of questions are very, very often in NTA UGC exam, there in which you will be asked about, from inside the work, there will be plenty of questions, and also there will be questions such as about the occupation of the characters and the beginning and ending of the work, and a particular statement from the work will be given, and you have to identify the work or the author made this statement. So different type of and match the following kind of question, chronology arrangement, asking to arrange you in chronological order. So a lot of questions will be such questions will be there in net exam from English literature, and other questions are from what cultural studies, and we know that from the criticism and theory, a lot of other type of questions are also there. The next question is, what comes after great pain in the famous Emily Dickinson poem? Okay, so there is a poem by Emily Dickinson, and we have to identify what comes after great pain. So after great pain is a phrase that we find in her poem. We have to identify what comes after that great pain. The letting go, a secret simplicity, substantial light, a formal feeling. Actually, after great pain in Emily Dickinson poem, what comes next? A formal feeling. Okay, so option D is the correct answer. Next question. Which of the following poems is quoted as the epigraphy to A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry? Okay, so actually this is a drama. Okay, A Raisin in the Sun is a drama, and it is written by Lorraine Hansberry. So which of this poem is quoted as the epigraphy? So in the epigraphy to this play, there is a poem quoted. So which is that poem that we have to identify? The Negro Speaks of River, that is the option one. Second one, Harlem, A Dream Deferred. Third option is The Big Sea. Fourth one is I Too Sing America. So Harlem, whenever you hear this particular American or Afro-American play, A Raisin in the Sun, you have to immediately remember the work Harlem or the poem Harlem, because not only it is given or quoted in the epigraphy of the play, but also the title of the poem is taken from this particular poem, Harlem, A Dream Deferred. Okay. The next question is here is during the Raj means British Raj, the British viewed their rule in terms of a thankless duty to uplift the downtrodden and inculcate order into Oriental minds. The mission to civilize the silent, sullen peoples of the East, it's East, AST is East. I think I left E here, was a burden imposed upon them by destiny. So we often, come across that the British people during the time of British Raj, they viewed that it is their duty that they civilize the Oriental mind. So that's in order to show the difference, and in order to have a comparison, they even made Oriental studies. They even invented Orientalism and all. So it was their view that their rule will, their rule will civilize the people of the East. So it's like their mission, their burden that they have, and that burden was imposed upon them by destiny. Okay, so the last is a fairly oblivious allusion to. See, the last means this particular line, this particular sentence, the mission of civilizing the Oriental minds is a sullen, civilize the silent and sullen people of the East was a burden imposed upon by them destiny. So this is an allusion to who actually stated or made this comment, who actually believed and propagated this thing in his work. Who was that? Okay, J.R. Ackley's Hindu Holiday, an Indian journal. Flora Annie Steele's The Garden of Fidelity. Maud Divers, The English Woman in India. Rudyard Kipling's The White Man's Burden. So you can understand this Rudyard Kipling, The White Man's Burden. From the here you can understand that Kipling was always believed this kind of illusion, and he actually wrote all his works, uh, you know, works for British people and about Indian themes and all. And the implicit reader or implied reader of his works were always English persons or English audience. And actually, George Orwell was criticizing Rudyard Kipling's attitudes and all. So all those things are there. So D. Rudyard Kipling, the white man's burden, who believed that it is the mission of the British Empire to civilize, and by ruling over them, the Oriental minds will get civilized, and that is a burden imposed upon them by destiny. Now, the next question: what attitude towards death would you find in such poems as Tennyson's Crossing the Bar, Whitman's Death Carol, and Kipling's El Envoy? So these poems, even though written by different kind of poets or different various kinds of poets, what kind of attitude towards death particularly you would find in such poems, especially Crossing the Bar by Tennyson, Death Carol by Whitman, and El Envoy by Kipling. So you can understand from this, or you can learn from this question, that all these poems, they carry a particular theme of death. Okay, just learn that, and learn the titles of the work and the author or the poet of that particular poem. So resignation, the attitude, whether the attitude of resignation towards death, or despair towards death, or hope towards death, or protest towards death. So it is hope. So the attitude that we can find in these poems towards death is of hope. Okay. Next, in which work does William Blake say that Milton was a true poet and of Devil's Party without knowing it? Okay, William Blake belonged to the transition period of English literature, which is also known as the Age of Sensibility, or better say romantic. He's more or less like a romantic poet, and he says that he said that see about Milton. So Milton is a true poet, but he is of Devil's Party without knowing it. Okay, so in which poem, in which work William Blake make this comment? Okay, London, Songs of Innocence, The Marriage of The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, The Chimney Sweeper. So please remember that these works are by Blake, and in particularly The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, we will find this particular statement by Blake. Okay. Next question. Which ancient writer's name is directly mentioned in Lord Byron's poem The Isles of Greece? So Lord Byron belonged to the second generation romantic poets, that group, and Byron has written a poem The Isles of Greece. So a person, an ancient writer, is directly mentioned in this poem. You have to find that ancient writer's name. Euripides, Sophocles, Aeschylus, Sappho. Sappho is the correct answer. The next question is, who viewed Wordsworth, Sade, and Coleridge as representatives of a sect of poets, descendants of descendants from the established systems in poetry and criticism, who constituted the most formidable conspiracy against sound judgment is Malted Political. So a person made this comment about Wordsworth, Sade, and Coleridge, calling them a group, okay, a sect of poets. So you have to find who made this comment about Wordsworth, Southey, and Coleridge, and viewing them as representatives of a sect of poets who were dissenters from the established systems in poetry and criticism, who constituted the most formidable conspiracy against sound judgment is Malthus Politica, who made this comment about Wordsworth, Southey, and Coleridge, whether it is Henry Vaughan, Francisco Franco, Ralph Vaughan, Francis Jeffrey. So it was Francis Jeffrey who viewed Wordsworth, Southey, and Coleridge in this manner. If you could pause the video and read the quotations, otherwise I don't think that simply listening will help you that much. But anyway, listen carefully. Next question we have S.T. Coleridge's Dejection and Ode. So Coleridge has written a work known as Dejection and Ode, opens with an epigraph which is a reference to a ballad. So identify the ballad. So in the opening session, in the poem actually opens with an epigraph. So in that epigraph, a ballad is referred by Coleridge. So you have to identify which ballad is referred in the epigraph of Dejection and Ode. Ballad of Goodly Fair, La Belle Dame Sans Mercy, Ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, Ballad of the Bibet. So here Coleridge actually referred to this particular option C, Ballad of Sir Patrick Spens in the epigraph to his poem Dejection and Ode. Next question. In imitation of which classical poet did Samuel Johnson write his London and the Vanity of Human Wishes? So Samuel Johnson belongs to the neoclassical age of English literature. Alexander Pope and Samuel Johnson, these are the two literary giants of the period. And Samuel Johnson has written London and the Vanity of Human Wishes, and in imitation of which classical poet he has composed these works. Okay, whether it is of Horace or Homer or Juvenal or Tasso. So he imitated Juvenal. So please remember and understand and learn that Samuel Johnson imitated Juvenal. Not only in London and the Vanity of Human Wishes, but also in other works that he has composed, he mainly imitated Juvenal. Okay. The next one. Who among the ancients prescribed that poetry should both instruct and delight? So obviously there is a debate going on in every other age whether poetry should be always only aesthetically satisfy, or it should instruct and delight, or it should have any didactic purpose at all. So one of the uh, ancient philosopher in the given set of options described or prescribed that poetry should both have should have both the instructive quality as well as the delightful nature. So who is that ancient philosopher, whether it is Longinus, Plotinus, Aristotle, or Horace? So it was Horace's ancient work, you remember, Ars Poetica. So in Ars Poetica he says that poetry should both instruct and delight. Both are the responsibility or the end aim of poetry. Okay. The next one is, who among the following exemplified the role of the peasant poet? Okay. Who among the following exemplified the role of the peasant? So who among cited the importance of peasant poet? John Clare. So two of them are there who exemplified the role of peasant poet. So you have to identify two poets: John Clare, John Keats, William Cobbett, and Robert Burns. Actually, Robert Burns, he is a kind of um, uh, he has a background, a peasant background, as well as John Clare also has a peasant background. And Robert Burns, he's more of he has written his poems in a Scottish dialect of English. And John Clare belongs to the Romantic age, and he is not a celebrated poet at all. But I have given some audio lectures in my website about John Clare, so you can go and check about him. So when we consider romantic poet, we won't consider John Clare as much, because John Clare is not that a celebrated poet, but he is a peasant poet. So John Clare and Robert Burns, these are the two poets who exemplified the role of the peasant poet. So you can see option D, 1 and 4 are the correct answer. The next question is, which of the following themes was not common to the works of Cavalier poets such as Thomas Carew, Sir John Denham, Edmund Waller, Sir John Suckling, James Shirley, Richard Lovelace, and Robert Herrick? See, from this question, you can learn a relevant point. The important Cavalier poets. Who all are the important Cavalier poets? Thomas Carew, Sir John Denham, Edmund Waller. Please say along with me. Okay, loudly. Please say along with me. Thomas Carew, Sir John Denham, Edmund Waller, Sir John Suckling, James Shirley, Richard Lovelace, and Robert Herrick. So these are the major Cavalier poets, and you can find Cavalier poets in which age of English literature? You can find them in the Puritan age. So in the Puritan age, you will also find other category of poets such as Cavalier poets are there. Then you have pre-Augustan poets are there. You have various kinds of groups are there. From this given option, you have to find which is not a common theme in the works of in the poems of Cavalier poets. And who were Cavalier poets? Cavalier poets, they actually supported the royal prerogative, and they supported the monarchy system, and they mainly the court poets of Charles the First. Okay, so loyalty to the king. Cavalier poets are their court poets, and they often show and they are always positive to the loyalty to the king and country ideals of good life. So they were always like, always talk about nice side, the positive side of life, and pious devotion to religious virtues and carpe diem. Carpe diem means what? Carpe diem means seize the day. See, live your life fullest and you know uh, or in all its heights, because you never know that you may or may not have a day to live. You may or may not have another day to live. So you have to seize the day and live it fullest. So that is the meaning of carpe diem. So all these three, see, they were not at all Puritan. They actually rejected, and they always went against whatever that is there as religious and Puritan in nature. See, these Cavalier poets, they were totally against those who supported parliaments and the Puritan people. Okay, so they rejected anything that is Puritan, anything that is religious. So they never talked about pious devotion to religious virtues. Okay, so that is one of the quality of Cavalier poets, that all these things got it extreme when monarchy was restored during the restoration period. Okay, so you have to understand certain points related to Cavalier. From here, you can learn much. You can learn important Cavalier poets as well as some of the features of their poetry. But they never talked anything related to pious devotion to religious virtues. Please remember that. The next question here is, what is the delicate balancing act of Andrew Marvel's Horatian Ode? So sorry for this spelling mistakes. It is Horatian Ode. Okay. What is the delicate balancing act of Andrew Marvel's Horatian Ode? So Horatian Ode, Andrew Marvel, basically he is a metaphysical poet. So we all know him, and we have must learned his to his coy mistress. And Andrew Marvell belongs to the first half of the or his major literary productions happened in the first half of the 17th century. So he belongs to, we can say, towards the end part of the Jacobean period and in the Puritan age. So Andrew Marvell is a metaphysical poet, and he has written an ode which is known as Horatian Ode, written upon the return of Cromwell. It goes like that. So, what is the delicate balancing act of this particular poem? Praising Roman virtues while endorsing Christian beliefs. Second one is celebrating the restoration while regretting the frivolity of the new regime. Praising feminine virtues while mocking the fixation on chastity. Celebrating Cromwell's victories while inviting sympathy for the executed king. So basically, Andrew Marvell actually he wrote the whole poem about Cromwell's victories and how he is serving his country, and also we can go for the option D, celebrating Cromwell's victories while inviting sympathy for the executed king. So Charles was first got executed in the year approximately 1630 and all. So and his son Charles II fled to France, and also he, along with expressing happy for, or celebrating about the victories of Cromwell, but he also sympathized about the executed king. The next question is, who among the following are referred to as the Scottish Chaucerians? So you have to identify who all are Scottish Chaucerians from this given list. Scottish Chaucerians are, who are Scottish Chaucerians and their age. Scottish Chaucerians, they are Scotland, poets from Scotland, and they imitated Chaucer. So that's why, and they got influenced and imitated Chaucer's way of composing poem, his themes and his diction, and also that's why they are known as Scottish Chaucerians, and we can find them in the Age of Revival, just after Age of Chaucer. So Chaucer is the giant figure in Chaucer's age, and after the coming age, in the coming age, lots of poets were inspired by him, and there were two group of poets are there: Scottish Chaucerians and English Chaucerians. So you have to identify Scottish Chaucerians from this given list: Thomas Hoccleve, Robert Henryson, John Lydgate, William Dunbar. So the option is the answer is 2 and 4. 2 and 4 means Robert Henryson and William Dunbar. So John Lydgate and Thomas Hoccleve, these are English Chaucerians. Okay, Robert Henryson and William Dunbar, these two are the Scottish Chaucerians. And James first of Scotland, Scottish king and all, they are, James first is also a Scottish Chaucerian. I remember his name. Now, next question. One of the less noticed and acknowledged distinction of the Canterbury Tales is that. So, which one is the least acknowledged and noticed distinction of Canterbury Tales? First one is, instead of revealing England's divisions, it revealed in its diversity. It upheld the idea that we cannot divorce poetry from knowledge, because poetry itself is an object of knowledge. The third option is, it alerted us the term auctor, someone who is both an originator or one who gives increase, the best description of Chaucer for Chaucer himself. It married domesticity to divinity, the baker's loaf with the bread of life. So you have to identify which is the least noticed and acknowledged division and distinction of Canterbury Tales. So all these B, C, D, all these options we have somewhere read, but I have, when I even saw this question and the option, I never heard anywhere that anybody talk about the you know the you know the unit the diversity that is there in, obviously they are talking about diversity, but they are talking about differences. They are not talking about the beauty of diversity that England society possesses. Instead, always we talk about that the different things that the society holds, and how Chaucer selected the characters from different strata of the England's society. But instead of revealing England's divisions, it revealed its diversity. So that is the least noticed and acknowledged distinction of the work, The Canterbury Tales. Next question. One of the most flexible meters dash is a 5-foot line. So if it is 5-foot line, immediately what will come to our mind? Pentameter, right? It was introduced by Geoffrey Chaucer. So this particular meter is introduced by Geoffrey Chaucer in the 14th century and has since then become the commonest of meters in English poetry. So always and always we will hear about iambic pentameter, anything that is in pentameter. So if it is 5 foot, then that is pentameter. So iambic, trochaic, hexameter, pentameter, from among, if since it is 5-footed, then we can guess. Even if you don't know, you can guess it is pentameter. From this question, you can learn that Geoffrey Chaucer introduced this particular common meter into English in the 14th century, and since then it became so popular in English poetry. The next question, of whom did W.B. Yeats say that We were the last romantics. So we were the last romantic is a famous quotation, is a famous kind of statement made by W.B. Yeats. So W.B. Yeats referring to whom, referring to which group or referring to whom he says this. We were the last roman. Who is this we? Obviously, one is W.B. Yeats and the other party is whom? Who is the other party? So the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, the Imagist poets, his friends in Irish literary revival, himself and his lady love, Maud Gonne. So you can learn many things from this question. Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood belongs to which age? The Victorian age, and I hope you remember D.G. Rossetti and the Imagist poets belongs to which age? The modern age. And Imagist poet Ezra Pound is an Imagist poet, and WBS belongs to Ireland. Okay, and he is the main person who worked behind the Irish literary revival. And referring to he and his friends in Irish literary revival, he said that we were the last romantics. And Maud Gonne is the lady love that he had, that he always had a fascination, and many of his poems are about Maud Gonne. Okay. The next question. Where, according to T.S. Eliot, are we likely to find not only the best but the most individual part of poet's work? So this question is from T.S. Eliot's literary criticism essay known as Traditional and Individual Talent. If you remember, T.S. Eliot has written a particular essay known as Traditional and Individual Talent. I have seen a lot of questions from this particular modern essay about individuality of a poet inside the work, and how how should we learn, why tradition is so important. And also T.S. Eliot, he was a traditionalist, and he mainly in favor of tradition. He talks in the tradition sorry the traditional and individual talent. So in that particular work he makes a statement, and he say that in a particular part of every work of every great work we can find the tradition. So you have to you have to identify what kind of part that he is referring. So he says that we will likely find the most individual part of a poet's work in a certain work. So which will be that particular part? Okay. So in the poet's juvenilia or rejected drafts. Okay. In the best anthologies and scrapbooks. In those parts where the dead poets show their immortality. In those parts where the living poets depart from their ancestors. So this fourth option. See, T.S. Eliot says that, see, when we look for the individual, the most and the best works or part of a certain poets or certain literary person's work, then we will go that we will search and find. We will try to find that in which part that the poet actually shows its most individuality, in the sense that the part is most fresh and most new and novel in its sense. But he says that is not the case. Where the dead poets, where the ancient poets show their immortality, show their great influence, and show their great presence, that part is the most best and most individual part of that poet's work. So option C is the correct answer. In those parts where the dead poets show their immortality. The next question, in Gerontian, T.S. Eliot says, see, if when it comes to poetry from T.S. Eliot, W.B. Yeats, lot of questions are asking from these two poets and their works. Okay, so they are like, you must learn something about them. In Gerontian, T.S. Eliot says, Dash has many cunning passages, contrived corridors, and issues received with the whispering ambitions, guides us by vanity. Okay, so in Gerontian, T.S. Eliot referring to something, he says that, Dash has a many, something will have many cunning passages and contrived corridors and issues deceived with the whispering ambitions. and they will guide us by vanities. So what is Eliot's subject? So about what that he is referring in this statement, okay, whether it is about history, politics, or state or religion. So it is about history. In Gerontion, he makes this particular statement about history. Okay. The next question is Philip Larkin's sad steps notices the way the moon dashes through clouds that blow loosely as cannon, smoke to stand apart. Okay, so you have to identify. Philip Larkin actually creates a mental image of moon dashing through the clouds that blow loosely as cannon and smoke to stand apart. So that is a beautiful image. And Philip Larkin has actually he's in another poetical work a same kind of imagery you can find just as Philip Larkin made in this statement, okay, in this particular work. Okay, you have to identify that work. Okay, so Philip Larkin, you know that he belongs to the contemporary period or the postmodern period, and he belongs to the movement poets. He's a movement poet. He belongs to the group of poets known as movement poets. So whether it is Coleridge's Dejection and Ode, the moonlight scene in A Midsummer Night's Dream, or Philip Sidney's Astrophil and Stella, T.S. Eliot Morning at the Window. So the answer is Philip Sidney's Astrophil and Stella. See, Philip Sidney belongs to the Elizabethan age, and he is a great poet of the time, and he wrote it's a sonnet sequence, Astrophil and Stella. So Stella means moon, Astrophil means moon lover. Okay, do you remember these points? Next question we have here. Which narrative poem by Lord Tennyson presents the story of a fisherman turned merchant sailor who, after a shipwreck, is marooned on a desert island? So, Lord Byron, he is actually presents a story through a poem. So, what is the story? A fisherman is there, and fisherman is turned merchant sailor who after a shipwreck is marooned. He was offshored to a desert island. So which is that particular poem by Lord Byron which tells this story. Okay, crossing the bar, Tithonus, Enoch Arden, Maud. So the correct answer is Enoch Arden. Next question. Based on the life of a 13th century troubadour from among the following, identify the work that marked a catastrophic failure in Robert Browning's poetic career, earning him a reputation for impenetrable difficulty. So, Robert Browning has written about the life of a 13th century troubadour from among the following work. You have to identify which is that work. Actually, that work was a catastrophic failure, and it actually earned him a reputation of impenetrable difficulty. That means that work was a tremendous failure, and along with that, that actually gave him the name and that he gained that actually earned him the reputation that his poetry is very difficult to understand. His poetries are impenetrable. Okay, which is that particular work? Paracelsus, Sordello, The Ring and the Book, Pauline. So the work is Sordello. The next question is here. In memorial verses, Matthew Arnold pays tribute to three great poets. Who are they? So, In Memoriam is written by Tennyson, Lord Tennyson. It's an elegy. And Memorial Verses is written by Matthew Arnold. And Matthew Arnold belongs to the age of Victoria, the age of Victorian age of English literature. And he, in this particular poem, he pays tribute to three great poets. And you have to identify that great three poets. Goethe, Shakespeare, Wordsworth, or Goethe, Shakespeare, Milton, or Shakespeare, Milton, Wordsworth, or Goethe, Wordsworth, Byron. Okay, so the answer is he is giving a tribute to Goethe, Wordsworth, Byron. Lord Byron belongs to the Romantic age, second generation Romantic poet in memorial verses by Matthew Arnold. The next question, arrange the following elegies in English in chronological order. See, in every other category, in every other session, you will find, at least three to four questions to arrange works or periods or authors in chronological order. Okay. Elegy written in a country churchyard, Adonias Thersis in memoriam. The elegy written in a country churchyard is written in the transition or age of sensibility by Thomas Gray. Adonias is written by Shelley, and Thersis is written by Keats, and in memoriam by Tennyson. Okay, Adonias and Thersis, these two belongs to the romantic period, and in memoriam belongs to the Victorian age. So you can better understand this. Elegy written in a country churchyard, Adonias in memoriam, and Thersis. So that is the correct chronological order. So this can be asked in any n number of ways. Okay, chronological, to arrange things in chronological order. So n number of questions can be asked in this category, in which you will be asking to arrange periods or authors or poets or playwrights or works in chronological order. This can be asked in any way, any n number of ways. The next question: a half sentence in Purchasing Pilgrimage triggered of Kubla Khan. So you know that Coleridge has written Kubla Khan after reading Purchasing Pilgrimage, and that actually prompted him to write Kubla Khan. So whose work was Parcher's His Pilgrimage? So you have to identify who is the author of this particular work, Parcher's His Pilgrimage. Whether it was of Robert Herrick's The Poet's Own work, or John Hockley's The Collection of Travelers' Tales, or Samuel Parcher's The London Parsons, or Edward Parcher's The Globe Trotter. So you may get confused. If you don't know the exact answer, then you may have a confusion between option C and D. But the correct option is Samuel Parcher's The London Parsons. Option C. The next one is: an English poet couldn't help the excitement that an historical event caused in his lifetime. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive. So actually a particular English poet is there, and he cannot hold his excitement for for a historical event that happened during his lifetime, and that particular English poet is writing these lines. Okay, bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was a very heaven, which poet what dawn. So what is here referred as dawn in this particular line? Okay, whether it is who is and also who is excited, which is the poet who is excited, and what is meant by dawn. Whether it is W.H. Auden, the Spanish Civil War, or Lord Tennyson, the Jubilee of Queen Victoria's reign, William Wordsworth, the French Revolution, or William Blake, the Industrial Revolution. So obviously, William Wordsworth, the French Revolution, and French Revolution was such an excitement for not only for Wordsworth but also for every other first generation and also second generation romantic poets of the romantic age. And romantic age was much influenced and or guided, or progressed as a result of the French Revolution. Next question: the four moral essays of Alexander Pope are addressed to carefully selected figures. Identify them. So there are four moral essays written by Alexander Pope. Alexander Pope belongs to the neoclassical age, and like I said already, Pope and Samuel Johnson, these are the two towering figures of this particular age. And Alexander Pope has written four moral essays, and he addressed these four essays to carefully selected figures. You have to identify these figures to which these four moral essays are addressed. Okay, Timon Newton, Martha Blount or Willington, or Lord Cobham, Robert Walpole, Houghton Hall, Chandos, Martha Blount, Lord Cobham, Bathurst, Burlington, or William III, John Haydn, Joseph Addison, and John Dennis. So, to whom Pope is addressing, to whom Pope addressed these four moral essays carefully. Okay, it was Martha Blount, John Cobham, Bathurst, and Burlington. Okay. The next question: William Blake expressed the importance of the particular when he said that to generalize is to be dash, to particularize is the alone distinction of merit. So William Blake made an expression about particular, generalizing something or particularizing something. Okay, he made this particular statement, and he said that to generalize is to be. So if you are generalizing something, then you are this. To particularize is the alone distinction of merit. So you have to identify this particular, particular word that fits in here, and you have to fill the blank. An idiot, a poet, a dreamer, a skunk. So the answer is an idiot. To generalize is to be an idiot. The next question. Lines from the poem is given. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry for free fear, in every voice, in every band. So these three lines are from a work. The figure of speech characterized by repetition of words and group of words at the beginning of consecutive sentence is called. So you have to identify a figure of speech from these lines. So repetition of words and group of words in the beginning of consecutive sentences. So what does that particular figure of speech called? That is anaphora. It is anaphora. Repetition of words and group of words at the beginning of consecutive sentences is called anaphora. Next question. Who is the only one Milton's contemporaries to be mentioned by name in Paradise Lost? So, Milton has composed the epic known as Paradise Lost. Milton belongs to the age of Puritan age, and he in that work, in that but Paradise Lost, Milton mentioned directly one of his contemporaries. Who is he? Francis Bacon, Johannes Vermeer, Galileo, King Charles. So it is Galileo that Galileo got a mention in Paradise Lost directly by Milton. The next work is Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, was published in 1621 and expanded and altered in that subsequent edition. So Robert Burton, he is actually a physician and he is also a writer, and he has composed the work Anatomy of Melancholy, and it was published in 1621. That means he belongs to which age? He belongs to the Puritan age, and he, after publishing it, he expanded and altered and even further edited the subsequent editions of Anatomy of Melancholy. So how many times he actually edited and altered and expanded this particular work? Whether it is two. So it is two. Okay, sorry for this mistake. 2, 4, 6, 5. So 5 times he altered and expanded in his 5 subsequent editions. Next question. One of the following statements about the eponymous saint of Dryden, Song of Saint Cecilia's Day is incorrect. Identify that. So, eponymous means the title character. So, here the saint which is there in the title is Saint Cecilia. So, one of the statement about this eponymous saint of Dryden, Song of Saint Cecilia's Day is incorrect. You have to identify which is not true about Saint Cecilia. Saint Cecilia was a Roman lady and early Christian martyr. Saint Cecilia was an American devotee of the Christian faith. Saint Cecilia's festival is celebrated on 22nd November in England. Saint Cecilia was a patroness of music who was fabled to have invented the organ, the musical instrument organ. So you have to identify which is not correct. So the answer is option B. Saint Cecilia was an American devotee of the Christian faith. So that is wrong. So about Saint Cecilia, this information is wrong. All other informations are correct. Next question. Which of the following poems by W.B. Yeats repudiated the sensual world in favor of the artifice of eternity? So which of the following poems? W.B. Yeats has written immense number of poems, and he actually repudiates the sensual world in favor of the artifice of industry. Actually, he rejects kind of a sensual world in favor of the artifice of eternity, because he considered that an artifice is eternal than this sensual and the world of living people. Okay, so artifice is more eternal and it is long lasting. Okay, so in which work he says that? Under Ben Bulben, so that if that is the work, or among school children, sailing to Byzantium, and after long silence. So it is, the answer is sailing to Byzantium. In sailing to Byzantium, Byzantium itself is a kind of center of this eternal life, and he talks about entering into Byzantium, how uh, spirits got purified there, and he wants to be an artifice there and all. So he says many things there. So W.B. Yeats, he repudiates sensual world in favor of the artifice of eternity in his poem Sailing to Byzantium. Byzantium and Sailing to Byzantium, these are kind of companion poems. Next work, which of the following images is not part of W.H. Auden's poem In Memory of W.B. Yeats? So, W.H. Auden has written a poem and a kind of unconventional elegy about the death of or about W.B. Yeats, in memory of W.B. Yeats, and he is particularly telling about the dying day of or death day. What are the things happening around him while W.B. Yeats was dying? Okay, you have to find out which imagery that Auden is not using in this particular poem. Mercury sinking in the month of dying day, wolves running through the evergreen forest, silence invading the suburbs, memory scattering like beads. So we cannot find option D, memory scattering like beads, but he says that, you know, in the on that particular month of the dying day, the memory is sinking, showing that it was so cold. And and he also say that, see, nobody really notices whether WB Yeats is dying, because he it is not that relevant for everyone, right? Only the people who are associated with him, who are standing around him, for them he is important. But what is the most important contribution that he gave to this world, that is that it is his own particular works, literary works, that is going to live long than his name itself, and everything that is going on in this world, that will going on as it is, even if WB is dead. That's why I already told you that Auden has written an unconventional kind of elegy about the death of W.B. Yeats. So the images that we could not find in this poem is memory scattering like beads. The next question is, which of the following historical events does Tennyson's poem The Change of the Light Bridge describe? So in this particular poem by Tennyson, he describes a historical event. So what is that historical event that Tennyson is describing in this particular poem? The Battle of Hastings, the War of the Roses, the Battle of Waterloo, the Crimean War. So Battle of the Hastings, you have to understand, this happened in the beginning of Anglo-Norman period. The War of the Roses happened in the Age of Revival, and the Battle of Waterloo happened in the age of what? The Romantic Age. The Crimean War happened also in the 19th century, and the Crimean War is the historical event that Tennyson describes in this particular poem, The Change of the Light Bridge. The next one. In Robert Browning's Andrea del Sarto, with which the following painters does Andrea not compare himself with? Okay, so Andrea del Sarto is about a poet. It's about a painter. And Browning is telling that Andrea del Sarto is a great poet, but he has some limitations, that he cannot go beyond his personal excuses and personal life, and he cannot, uh, bring about soul to his paintings and all, because of some restrictions that he has in his life, and he doesn't know how to go beyond that. So he is not comparing, he is compared to several other poets of the history, but we have to identify that from the given options, and Andrea, with whom Andrea is not compared with himself with. Okay, Michelangelo, he compares himself with Michelangelo, also Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael, but he never compares himself with Rembrandt. Okay. The next one is, in which poem does Matthew Arnold expresses the dilemma of wandering between two worlds, one dead, the other powerless to be born? So Matthew Arnold belongs to the Victorian age, and he in one of his poems he expresses his dilemma, that wandering between two worlds, that he is wandering between two worlds, one world is dead and other is powerless to be born. So, in which poem that he does that? Self-dependence, stanzas from the Grande Chartreuse, then to a Republican friend, Dover Beach. So stanza from the Grande Chartreuse is the correct answer here. Next question. Which Victorian poet is the author of the following line? God himself is the best poet and the real is his song. Okay. So who authored this particular, or which poet created these two lines? God himself is the best poet and the real is his song. Lord Tennyson, Robert Browning, Matthew Arnold, sorry, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So Elizabeth Barrett Browning has written these lines. God himself is the best poet and the real is his song. So Elizabeth Barrett Browning, of course, belongs to the Victorian age. That is there in the question itself. Next question: Who published the first collection? Who published who published the first collected edition of Gerald Manley Hopkins' poem in 1918? So who published it? The first collected edition of Hopkins' poem in 1918. Robert Bridges, Coventry Patmore, John Benjamin, Stephen Spender. So it was Robert Bridges published the first edition of Gerald Manley Hopkins' poem in 1918. The next question for Coleridge, our power to perceive symbols gleaned from the world about us is related to the category of. See, in his work of criticism, Biographia Literaria, Coleridge actually distinguished between fancy and imagination, primary imagination and secondary imagination. See, there is those definitions that he gives; those are very very complicated. So we have to identify about which category from the given options he says that this particular thing is our power to perceive simples gleaned from the world above us that symbols are gleaned coming to us uh, from a world above, and this is a power that we perceive, that we have to identify that symbols. So which is that, whether it is primary imagination, secondary imagination, fancy or intuition? So that is primary imagination. The next question: this Byron work revolves around a wife whose is presumed lost at sea, and she takes a lover in his absence. So Byron actually he writes a work about a wife whose husband is presumed to lost in the sea, and in his absence she takes a lover. Everybody behaves agreeably on the husband's return. Byron's technical skills in verse is in display here, as the work counterpoints the colloquial and the formal. So you have to identify in which work Byron tells such a story of a wife who takes a lover in his absence, and afterwards the husband returns back. And in this work, Byron actually displays his technical skills in verse composition, whether it is Manfred, Don Juan, Beppo, or the Bride of Abydos. So here the particular poem is Beppo by Lord Byron. The next question: which Byron work begins thus? So you have to identify which Byron's work begins like this: I want a hero, an uncommon want, when every year and month sends forth a new. Okay, Beppo, Cain, Manfred, Don Juan. Okay, so the answer is Don Juan. Sorry for these spelling mistakes here. The next one, in the opening book of the Prelude, Wordsworth mentions famously that he was fostered alike by dash and dash. You have to identify, you have to fill the two blanks. That Prelude is a kind of autobiographical work by Wordsworth, which actually published posthumously. And he mentions that he fostered alike by dash and dash. Whether it is nature, fear, imagination, beauty. So from this list, you have to find out two terms suitable in that blank. It is 4 and 2. That means beauty and fear. So he was fostered alike by beauty and fear. Okay. The next question. What happens to the lock of hair at the end of Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock? So it is a mock heroic poem. So Alexander Pope has written a mock heroic poem known as The Rape of the Lock. And Pope mainly says that, a lock by Belinda. Belinda is having a lock of hair, and the lock of hair is, actually cut with a scissor by Peter, person known as Peter. And what happens to this lock afterwards? It is given back to its rightful owner. It is preserved in a monument, and it runs into a star. It is presented to the poet as a token of gratitude. So what happens? So at the end of this particular work, particular heroic, mock heroic poem, this lock of hair actually, it runs to the stars. It actually goes to the up high and goes to the stars and forms a star there. So that's what happens there about the lock of hair. The next question. Which among the following gave the expression, a leopard can't change its spot to English language? So, one among them, they, I mean, they actually, or in that particular work, or in that particular person, that particular author says that, referring to English language, it is a statement about English language that a leopard can't change its spot. Okay, the King James Bible, Geoffrey Chaucer, Shakespeare, the Royal Society. So it is the King James Bible. Okay. The next question: who among the following is the author of Steps of the Temple? Who among the author of Steps of the Temple? So this is kind of particular uh, poetry collection of a author, of a poet, whether it is of John Donne, no, Richard Crashaw, George Herbert, Henry Bergency. All these are metaphysical poets. And the Steps of the Temple, it is a poetry collection by Richard Crashaw. So the next question is, which of the following rivers are mentioned in Andrew Marvell's poem to his coy mistress? See, to coy mistress is a famous poem that we all have learned in our MA or UG classes. So I still remember attempting this question. This was actually the first question, I think, of the question paper, and I actually put the wrong answer for this question. I wrote that it is Thames and Ganges, but it was Ganges and Humber. So in the initial part of the poem, Andrew Marvell says that actually Andrew Marvell in this poem, he prompts, or the speaker of the poem actually persuades his beloved to have physical love with him. Okay. So he initial part of the poem, he says that, see, we don't have that much time to spend because anyway we are going to die. We don't have centuries to live. So it's better that we live today itself or now itself before we lose our time. And we cannot, if we had time, we can spend as many times as possible in the shores of Ganges or the shores of Humber and all. But I selected, unfortunately, the second option, Thames and Ganges, but that was wrong. The correct answer is Ganges and Humber. Okay. The next question. Samuel Johnson denounced the metaphysical poet, saying, about the beginning of the 17th century appeared a race of writers that may be termed the metaphysical poets. In biography of which of the following poets in his Lives of Poets did Johnson make this remark? So, Johnson's one of the remarkable work is the compilation of biographies of poets of his preceding ages or contemporary poets also. So, Lives of Poet is by Samuel Johnson. He belongs to the 18th century or neoclassical age of English literature, and he negatively denounced, means he was not approving metaphysical poets, and he also gave John Donne and a particular group of poets as metaphysical, and he denounced them, and he said this statement: about the beginning of the 17th century appeared a race of writers that may be termed as the metaphysical poets. So while describing, while saying about, while telling about which poet's life, that he is commending like this: John Dryden, Thomas Parnell, Abraham Cowley, Alexander Pope. So from the given list, Abraham Cowley is the major metaphysical poet. So we can go for it. The answer is option C, Abraham Cowley. See, he begins his life of poet with Abraham Cowley. Also remember that too. So we already finished the 50 questions of this particular part 1 of previous questions from the session. poetry. So the next part will also carry another 50 questions that you wait for the next day. And also I hope that this was helpful for you. If you find this was helpful and you like this video, press the like button, and also don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also follow me in these platforms. You can visit me in my website known as www.highpoint.in, and also WhatsApp me or call me in this number if you want any sort of helps regarding UGC NET English language and literature. I would be very very glad if you call and ask, because I can freely lend you all those kind of helps. And also you can mail me in this mail address, and you can obviously click the link that I am given in the description box, in which you can join a WhatsApp group, and you will find daily quizzes and notes and updates related to UGC NET and JRF there. Okay, guys, so and obviously you can go and visit my website to know what all things you have to learn in order to understand what are the topics and subtopics and even subtopics that you have to learn for various in order to achieve your UGC NET English, and also help you to understand literature more and more. So that's all, guys. Thank you for listening to my video. Let's meet in the next video session. Until then, bye bye. Thank you.